I believe they're recording this. That's why I have to stand here. Otherwise, I would be closer. What I want to do very early on. First, there's a handout in the back for anyone who wants it or needs it. They're on the chair coming in. I want to say what I'm going to do, and then anybody who doesn't want to do that can leave and get to one of the other ones. And that you're more interested in. But I intend to take up the question of religious illiteracy and to talk about it in terms of what the secular world tells us about it. And thus you see many of those authors on the first part of the thing. Then I want to go into a part using a lot of David Tracy's idea about correlation in theology, how theology ought to work. And then I want to talk practically about some of the ways that one might go about dealing with this religious illiteracy. I want to talk about our proposal for a Catholic professorship, and that's been in your packet of material, and also about the Exploring the Faith series that I have out. So that structures my talk. I think what I'll do is I'm going along, try to feel my way with the audience to see if people have questions, or there's a handout at the door if you want one. And if people have questions, we might do some one-to-one discussion, opportunity for interaction. We got a relatively small group, so we ought to be able to do that. So I think parts will be heavy for those who aren't into theology, especially the second segment. And it will, probably, that's a lot of the focus of what I want to do. So with that in mind, people know I speak from within the world of campus ministry. I'm going to be one of the veterans of this whole thing. I think I've been at this 22 years, something like that, and have had a lot of opportunity to talk to different people and to find out what's going around in the country and so on. First of all, the question of religious illiteracy, as all attempts to read the signs of the times, has sort of an ambivalence about it. There's a lot of good things going on today. I think the main one, in my mind, is we live in a century of the giants. We live in a century of Paul Tillich and Karl Barth, of Karl Rahner and Bernard Lonergan. It's a rare century that I would think you'd have to go back to the 13th century to see anything comparable to the theological revival that we've had in our own time. So that seems to be a very positive sort of trend. Also, you look around some of our Catholic campuses, a lot of good work being done theologically, good solid courses, improvements in offerings and so on. There's a handout there on the way in that would be helpful. So that all of that, is to be, I think, see that as a positive side to all this. We got some private universities with excellent departments of religion, religious studies programs, and so on. And then, the other side of it, I guess we're all too aware of in our work. That is, this whole idea of appropriating the faith is a difficult thing to make work. When in the campus ministry pastor, we had 6 different categories, if you remember, that could guide one. We talked about forming community and educating for justice and facilitating personal development and forming leaders and all of that. And one of those categories was appropriating the faith. And I guess I'm sort of pleased that many of the categories have held up. That is, we still use them in workshops and training sessions and so on. That seems to me to be a good thing, and it pleases me. But when we look at all that, the one that we've had the most trouble with seems to me to be that one, appropriating the faith in some ways. We're good at running retreats. It's a lot of good formation programs going on, I suppose. Marvelous liturgies around the country that form a good sense of community. We're doing a lot better in the world of justice these days. But as I talk to people, the idea of becoming theologically literate or appropriating the faith in an intellectual way really is providing a great deal of difficulty with us. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's part of it, I think, bears on what I want to say today, and what tends to go wrong and why we haven't been able to pull this off in a better way. So a lot of us know that we live in a society that's religiously illiterate. The public school system doesn't pass on the religious heritage. Most of our state universities don't have departments of religion. And we have a citizenry that doesn't know the well springs of Western culture and doesn't know the particulars of the theological tradition. Now, what I want to do is look at this from the secular side. Instead of sitting here as church people and saying, yeah, this is what's wrong, it's interesting to see how the culture as a whole is recognizing the terrible effect of this religious illiteracy. I want to do it in terms of the psychological considerations, then sociological ones, cultural ones, and more directly religious ones. The handout that you have is simply a guide to books that would have helped me to form my own thinking on this. And the first part of the handout represents some of the literature from what I would say the broadly secular world that has recognized the problem that I'm talking about. So first of all, we know it from the psychological side. Jung moved far beyond Freud as far as we're concerned in saying that problems have to do with meaning. There are religious questions people have to deal with. The humanistic psychologists have helped us a whole lot. A lot of us feel comfortable with Maslow and Rogers and Allport and that whole line of thought. When we read them, we say these people understand something about human development and it's got sort of a spiritual or religious significance to it. Now, Sharon Parks, I think, in her book, The Critical Years, has been so... Let me ask how many people have read that. Well, we got a mixed thing, less than half. So I guess I have to say, I might ask about a lot of these. If people haven't read them, I guess I have to say something about them rather than just calling out the points. But Sharon Parks, The Critical Years, makes the claim that in this period of time, these young adults, the collegiate age level we're dealing with, that they are involved in creating a meaning system for themselves, composing meaning, as she says. They're reordering their faith. They're trying, as she says, to relate their faith to their belief. Now, that's a very helpful distinction. It's almost surprising to pick up a psychologist and to see that. That's a distinction I know from Lonergan, from Tillich, and a lot of the 20th century theologians, distinguishing faith and belief. It's very helpful. So faith has to do with the fundamental meaning system that we have, the way we cope with the world, the way what we think is important and treasure even before we think about religion or God or church or anything like that. And that's what Sharon Parks thinks that we're about in these young adult years, that people are recomposing that. To use Paul Ricoeur's idea, they're moving from a first naivete to a second naivete. They're reordering their thought process. They're trying to figure out how they live in the world, who they are, trying to figure out how to relate the belief system they have received from their parents, from the culture as a whole, to this faith that's in their heart. That a lot of the conflict of the young people we deal with is precisely that. How do they take their faith? What is there in their guts they think is true? What do they really begin to work out for themselves about what counts and what they treasure? How does that relate to the Catholic belief system that they've received? A lot of that has. And Sharon Parks talks about the troubles in going through this, the shipwreck that occurs. People get shipwrecked. They get disillusioned, got a lot of problems to work it out. And then she says what we got to have is a community of imagination. I like that phrase. We got to have a community of imagination, a community with symbols and an interpretive scheme, with outlook on life that can indeed help people to work their way through these psychological problems. Here's a quote from Sharon Parks. The central task of young adulthood is to discover and to compose a faith that can orient the soul to truth and shape a fitting relationship between self and world. Now, I find this to be a quite remarkable thing from the world of psychology itself. And what it says is that when people are religiously illiterate, that they have trouble doing this meaning-composing task. And what it suggests to us is that we're vitally important. What I get out of this literature in general is our importance. You realize these people would have to invent us if we didn't exist. Yeah, a community of imagination. Where are you going to find a community of imagination? At the Brookings Institute? No, where are we going to find this? And so here we are. It suggests that we are really at the center point of the modern psychological drive for some sort of meaning. And it is, I think Sharon Parks is right on target in talking in those terms. Now that's sort of illustrative of what I want to do with all this. So we say, hey, we got something to offer to this. We know something about meaning. We know about the task of creating a community of imagination. We have symbols. We're big on symbols. And our central symbol of the Eucharist, we have something to say about this. And the conviction is to help young people to grow, develop as they go about this. Then to move to what I might call a more cultural kind of analysis now, and a lot of this next one I think is familiar to many people, and that is that when we live in a religiously illiterate society, we are more in danger of individualism taking us over. That's the Robert Bellah critique. A lot of us know that, Habits of the Heart, and his distinction between utilitarian and expressive individualism. But what do you come up with in that whole analysis? What is lost and what is needed? That is the biblical communal sense of human existence. The fact that we belong to groups, to communities, peoplehood, exodus, forming a community, Jesus the community gatherer, miracles of Jesus that help show him to be one who's trying to bring people back into the mainstream. In other words, again, we have a whole long, rich tradition here that says that indeed we are not autonomous individuals, but people who come to our being, come to know who we are in community. And so we've always distrusted in our heritage Descartes and that whole isolation. I'm an individual monad trying to figure out what's going on and the rest of the looking out. We grow up in family, neighborhoods, and communities. Again, we have a rich tradition that we bring to bear upon this problem. It's again, it's in public failure probe to favor Satan, not recognize the well-brained biblical communalism. Then we might turn to the world of knowledge. Again, set up you can see in your eye and so the word technology and how we go with all of that. Maybe I'm out of sync with the outline that yeah, I'm right on target with what your notes say. I have a little different pattern here in one place. So so we're talking about technology, and that I think what this author here in dealing with technology that I've talked about, Borgman, is really good in saying that it becomes a pattern, a way of thinking. The technology isn't just that you got a vacuum cleaner or you can keep little babies alive when ordinarily would die, but it shapes our mentality. It becomes a way of looking at the world, become technologized in consciousness. And therefore, that begins to influence. So where does that take us? I mean, once we start thinking in this technologized way, well, then we start thinking, well, it's a matter in life of having commodities. So technology produces what vision is advertising is scarce. That's the problem. You know, run of things. Whether it's odor and beer, you're not going to have enough of it. You got to get more of it. So television, again, he's got a thing in of television where he says that the problem with it is that it takes away from our other activities like conversation. Remember the movie Avalon? Really telling kind of common people who saw the movie Avalon. You had a communal family, you had Thanksgiving meals, all important and so on. And as the movie progresses, Next Generation on Thanksgiving is sitting there eating separate things, watching television. And so it takes away the conversation, as he says. It takes away creative play. It takes away common meals, etc. And so we've got a problem now. Now we've got a difficulty in consciousness. And again, to say we got something really important to offer about technology. We don't have to be Luddites. We don't have to walk around smashing machines or technology. But what we've got is a perspective. We recognize that technology should serve individuals, that we should perfect technology, get so it doesn't pollute as much, so it's not as dangerous, so we can control it. And we're the people who know somehow it's supposed to be for the good of the human being. That's why we have all of these things. And so I see the need for perspective on this. And again, it's interesting. The philosopher, Ed Borgmann's a philosopher, by the way, he understands that it is a spiritual type problem of technology and not simply a matter of more dollars per particular devices and so on. He points out in his book that there's about 2/3 of the people that, if you ask the question right, have some feel for the simpler life. Have some sense that the quality of life is more important than the standard of living. It's an interesting play. That's the two sort of marks. Which one becomes the standard of living, raise that, or quality of life? Again, we have to say about that, and that we are the ones who are able to move us perhaps in a more positive direction along that line. Then I'm looking next, and I'm not sure that I'm going to follow along all in the line here, but I saw another kind of problem where on the cold side it is the environmental kind of problem. Again, we're into the ecological crisis. You all got that down, Love Canal, Chernobyl, the ozone layer being depleted, and all of that. That's clear to us. But what isn't clear is the whole religious question. People aware of Lynn White's essay goes back many years now. Lynn White said the reason we got the environmental problem is because of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's what's produced it, because the Judeo-Christian tradition has said dominate the earth. And this won't happen in other kind of cultures, he claims. It's precisely the biblical tradition that's created it. Now that has sparked a whole long debate, as you might know, trying to refute that argument, that the Judeo-Christian tradition is not necessarily the cause of the problem, and in fact it could be part of the solution. So a lot of our people now who are writing, Michael Hine, Notre Dame, Thomas Aryan is The Dream of the Earth, I think one of the birth written on this line, along with Moltmann's book, Theology of Creation. That's Moltmann with an M. But you begin to see there are resources within our tradition that says, no, it's not just dominate, it's not just that one text in Genesis, but there's a whole biblical feel for the notion that we are to be stewards of the earth, that we are to tend the garden. And begin to tending the garden has a much different feel than subduing and dominating the world, the animal world, and nature, and so on. So we've got, thinking, when we begin to look at environmental crisis, we got people from within that saying, hey, it's a spiritual problem. It's a question of perspective, of attitude. How do you see the world? It's like someone said, all that she's got to get at the thing they do is out of the problem. Begin the question of treasury. Value in spirit is just your hand. As tell your dad, and hands effect for 4.56 billion percent. Years in. So that's spiritual talk. That's got the idea of a creator, of evolutionary process, of sort of love ethic that works out in relationship to nature. So again, it seems as though we need all of that. A fourth area that I think needs to be looked at in cultural terms, and that has to do with consumerism. Well, that becomes one of our great problems, but we have people now within the secularized world writing about all of this that say this is messing us up. We can't just keep doing that. One way of saying it is, if everybody on the earth now, adult, had an automobile, we'd die very quickly. I was over in communist China this past summer, and going down the street in Guangzhou, and there's this phalanx of bicycles coming at me, And if you stop and think, if all those people had cars over there, they'd have instant gridlock. And we'd have pollution of the whole world. So, in other words, you need striking ways, it seems, and that's often created from within the world of social science and so on, that this consumerism won't work. Oh, and here we are. Every answer to our economic problem is more growth, higher GNP, keep the cycle going, spend more. I mean, I wrote an article about that. Remember Saturday Night Live had George Bush on television hawking goods, and that's what we got to get up there. Let's spend more, have more. And begin to see, wait a second. We have a Christian ethic that's got something to say about that. It's not having more that counts, it's being. Being precedes having. And individuals have worth and dignity apart from what they have. So there's a whole other ethic, and there's something we call like sacrifice and self-denial and simple life forms and so on. Well, the world's going to need this. Everybody can't have an automobile. It's simple. You can't have the growth rate in the urbanization and the industrialization and live on this planet. And therefore, we become, again, extremely important as we begin to sort all of this out. And finally, in this cultural section of trying to look at what people are saying, and that is the idea of progress itself. Christopher Lash's book I talk about there, The Only Heaven. Interesting, a social scientist, cultural historian, trying to figure all this out, and writes a book titled The Only Heaven. And the point of it is you can't have heaven on earth. Can't have constant progress. And he begins to search through the tradition, and he leaves out a lot of it that I would like to add. I mean, he's got Jonathan Edwards in there and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who are saying a philosophy of limits. Got to have a philosophy of limits. Well, we've got something that speaks to that. We got Jesus in his whole ethic, his self-sacrificing ethic, dying to self and so on, and acceptance of life. What was it my mentor Carl Rahner said, the key to the whole spiritual life is self-acceptance. But how hard that is to achieve, and part of self-acceptance is to accept limitations. Well, anyway, so we begin to see that Lash is calling a tradition that we could well expand that has to do with recognizing the limitations of human existence, that you can't always have progress, that there's more to the world than that. So all that's to say, you look at a lot of the cultural critics today, and they're saying the same thing. Religious illiteracy is hurting us. It's bad, and when we read that stuff, we can say, we got something to say about it. We're crucial to this conversation. Bring us into the center of it, because we got a tradition that speaks precisely to all that. Then let's look at it sort of from a societal, from a sociological viewpoint. Now I call back on Bella again. People know his the second book that is getting a lot of play these days, The Good Society. If you read The Habits of the Heart, you can move on to The Good Society. And fundamentally what Bella is saying, that we don't deal well with institutional life, with family, with neighborhood, with universities, with churches, with governments. So what we got? A president who kept getting elected on the premise of running against government. I mean, it's the strangest kind of thing. We got a lot of Christians running around and saying they're going to follow Jesus but have no institutional structure. We got students who can't stand the institution of the university. So we live in an anti-institutional world. Johannes Metz, Rahner's great disciple, talks about it in terms of an excessive privatization. His problem with Nazi Germany wasn't so much that the Christians didn't band together as little groups to fight against Hitler, which was Rahner's idea more or less, but he said the problem was the institutional church didn't act because Hitler feared the Catholic bishops. And so he keeps saying it in institutional terms, and again, we live in a society that has lost touch with that. So we have resources again that could bring us back to that, because we've kept saying that this communal thing that Jesus started takes institutional form. And so the Dulles writes a book about a communal model of the church, but we still got an institutional model because we recognize the church has to have structure. And there has to be some sort of way of organizing ourselves. And therefore the institution becomes a helpful kind of thing. So we could draw on that tradition, it seems to me, to say something about how we might deal better with the institutional life, whether it's family, university, church, and so on. Just a footnote on all of that, and it moves me into my next point. I'll save it for the next point, next societal point, and that is that we have to recognize the problem of the post-Persian Gulf syndrome. Just think of it this way. We're going to have young people we're going to deal with now whose consciousness of war and peace is not shaped by Vietnam with the body counts, the blood, and the failure, but whose consciousness will be shaped almost entirely by the Persian Gulf War, which is antiseptic, clean, neat, quick, almost glorified, and we win. And therefore, we're in a position here where we're in great danger of a new kind of nationalism. And that will, more and more, the young people we get will be shaped by that. Not by Vietnam, which had a whole different message, but by that experience. Their image will be of a bomb going in through an opening in a roof and blowing some stuff up underneath that you never even see. And so, again, out of that we say, yeah, a social criticism of the Persian Gulf consciousness has to be raised, and it's a religious critique that has to be made. It's two sides. It's like Richard Rohr was saying today. I mean, you just think in terms of winners and so on. There's no way to critique that except from a faith perspective. It all is too neat, clean, wonderful, and all. Let's jump up and down for joy. There's where I see a big part of this problem. So with religious critique. Finally, let me say something about this from a religious viewpoint. How the fact that we are religiously illiterate hurts us. First of all, is a common thing that we don't know how to deal with fundamentalism. And by fundamentalism, I think Tom O'Meara is on a good track at Notre Dame when he says it's broader than just that group of people we call fundamentalists, who were formed in the beginning of this century when the rich Texas oilmen gave them a lot of money to write these pamphlets called Fundamentals, and where we got Princeton University, Hodge and Warfield and all those people creating a fundamentalist theology. That's one thing. But the problem is a fundamentalist mentality. It is a doctrinaire exclusivism that comes into religion. That can come into Catholicism as well as into evangelical Protestantism, or, as we know, into the Muslim world. So that what we need, when we are religiously illiterate, and this plays out very clearly with our students unable to know what to do with the people who knock on their door and say, come to our Bible study, and where they get a fundamentalist sort of line. Very real kind of problem. Again, we're not going to overcome that except by improving our religious literacy. Second thing under the religious side is the ecumenical or interfaith side of it. Have to work at that. Without it, we don't know how to relate to the Protestant world. But I think larger interfaith, we don't know how to relate to the Muslim world. So as people have said, from within the secular world again, the great conflict in the future is the Christian West and the Muslim East. And the Persian Gulf War speaks to that. And we run a lot of Christian-Muslim dialogues at our place. I find them wonderful. I love to participate in them. I never have seen such passion, enthusiasm about religion. Hundreds of Muslim students that show up for these dialogues. They don't let me go home, for hours afterwards. Just want to fight and argue and all of this, and but anyway, that becomes crucial to the geopolitical situation in the world. I believe that we become, near the forefront of this. Thirdly, and that is the whole problem of the role of religion in public life. Draw a Newhouse here and a number of other people, naked public square, Evangelical Protestantism doesn't make it anymore. It's not the dominant voice. What I say, mainline Protestantism doesn't make it, isn't in the running the public sphere, as he says. He talks about the Catholic moment. I don't agree with that. I see it as an opportunity not for a Catholic moment, but for a Catholic participation in the ongoing dialogue about public life. Participation in the dialogue epitomized by our bishop's pastoral letters in the 80s on the economy and on peace. And finally, we need to be religiously literate because of parish life, because we're training people who are going to go out and be part of parishes. They got to know what to do, and they got to have more than goodwill. More than goodwill. They have to figure out how to function intelligently and to have an adult grasp of their faith if they're going to function effectively in parishes in the future. Well, that's a rather lengthy attempt, but I mean, the thrust of it, I think everybody can feel, and I think it's absolutely crucial. We're not walking alone with a strange religious message that, hey, let's learn about religious traditions. The world recognizes right now at this time we're screwed up precisely because we don't have that spiritual dimension, because the religious traditions have been lost, and because the world won't function well without that kind of mix, that symbol, that imagination that Sharon Parks called the community of imagination. Well, that's my first overarching point. What I'd like to do now is to I'd ask you to talk to the person next to you about that and see if any of that rings true to you. I mean, if you can make it real, practical in your own setting. Instead of just saying that's all a bunch of baloney, try to figure out if there was something positive in there that you could make sense to you. I'd invite you to talk to the person next to you. If you need to stand up to stay awake, too, would be great. Or get a glass of water. Let me talk about that next section, okay? Right, can I have your attention, please? That's not a microphone. I think it's... Can I have your attention, please? Can I see if we have any questions or comments anyone wants to make on that first section that we've dealt with here? I have a question already that I'm saving to the next part. Yeah.
I have a question. Since you have 22 years of Gilchrist whiskey experience,
Yeah.
and you said we have a rich tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would readily agree with that.
Yeah.
How do we convince the Catholic students that our tradition is rich?
It's a good question. And that part of what I want to do in the next section is try to answer that question. Yeah. And I try to answer it theoretically and then somewhat practically. I think that's the logical next step, isn't it? Yeah.
To speak just for a moment to the notion of fundamentalism,
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate your broadening that.
Mm-hmm.
I read an article during the war, a year ago, I guess, about the notion of fundamentalism being even broader than that. We often look at it only in religious terms, but the author, and I can't recall who it was now, said that fundamentalism really is, how did you put it, doctrinaire exclusivism is the way to put it. But that would be applied to any problem, and it will make it better.
Right.
That could be,
Sure.
an economic answer to a problem, or
Sure.
a religious one, or a philosophical one, or whatever. You can be a fundamentalist in any of those areas.
I agree. That's a good point. You could make Milton Friedman into a fundamentalist in that sense. And I mean, the danger is, the doctrinaire exclusivism, as I see it. That becomes the problem. When one group wants to co-opt the language, as the moral majority tried to do in the United States at one time, and to claim that they have exclusive insights and so on. The problem is that religion has usually been able to do that in a more powerful fashion than other groups because they got a sort of ultimate answer to it. We got it from God. I mean, most secularized thinkers can't say that. They have to argue their point in some way. So the religions get that strange sort of twist that they can say it is divine revelation. It tells them.
I just wanted to say that springing from that was a thought that has become more and more clear to me. And that is that although it might not be identified as a religion that would be excluded by whatever constitutional things, our whole kind of being American,
Yep.
politically or otherwise, has become a real religion.
Sure.
For us.
And one could analyze that again in terms of Robert Bella's notion of the American civil religion. And it's and it's not just made up. I mean, it is, you can identify it within the conversations of our presidents and our senators, where the American way of life becomes a religion. And it's got holy days like Thanksgiving and saints like Washington and Jefferson and sacred documents like the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. It's got mottos like In God We Trust. And it's got a dominant mythology, which is Exodus in its orientation. That is a group of people under the pharaoh of the kings in Europe come across the body of water to the promised land. Therefore, we become the chosen people. And it's not just made up. It's right through our history. Jefferson said God has made a covenant with us as he did with Israel of old. And that shaped our thinking ever since. Lyndon Johnson talked about the covenant we made with this land. So it's right within our whole long tradition, for sure. Point's well taken. I think absolutely on target in my mind.
Yeah, along the lines where you're talking about the technology and technologization of consciousness, I would also, from my vantage point, also talk about the fragmentation of consciousness. That there's some ways that we act and react in our lives that actually are not even put together in any way, shape, or form, whether it be technology, whether it be religion, whether it be in government, or our political lives, that in a certain sense we think about different things in different ways, so much to the point that we're not even aware sometimes of the inherent or internal contradictions
Right.
of the kinds of decisions that we make in various areas.
And that analysis, what I think, is right on target. And that's phenomenological. In other words, if you preach or teach that way, people know what you're talking about. If you can say it, we feel split, we got various allegiances, we feel at loose ends, we feel like it's hard to pull it together, hard to get it together, hard to see it whole. I was just at a New Year's Eve party this year, and we sort of have a tradition of sharing resolutions and checking ourselves in the group a year later on how we were doing. It gets a very serious, heavy conversation, not your normal New Year's Eve thing, but that was one of the themes. That was one of the themes. I suppose a little of the vino loosens the tongue in that setting, but yeah. And people talked like that. I mean, we had a doctor sitting there saying that he felt he's becoming more superficial and fragmented. 58 years old. And he's contrasting it with the kind of centeredness and depth he used to feel. Sharing that with us. So what you're saying is absolutely right, but it also takes us back to my primary point. What offers integration? What is it that claims a total integration? That's the world's religious traditions. That's what it's supposed to be, an overarching scheme, an interpretive scheme. That's a sociological way of defining religion. And it has that power to shape us and to pull us together. And so, I mean, people are feeling that all over the world. I was lecturing in Moscow, and a member of the Supreme Soviet in the group that was, and afterwards, and I was talking all this religion, spirituality, and so on. And it was a panel. I was there with Governor Gilligan and some other people, and a guy got up from the Supreme Soviet, and he says, kind of 220 leaders, Supreme Soviet, all this is 1990. Gets up and says, I want to thank Dr. Basic especially for raising the spiritual and religious sides of these economic questions. And then he looked out and he said, and comrades, that's exactly what we have forgotten and lost. So you see it around the world. In other words, that's one of the great ways of analyzing the fall of communism now in terms of the inherent religious spirit and the need for integration, for wholeness, and for depth. So true. Last one, and then I want to go on. Yeah.
Please stop your machine at this point and turn your cassette over for side 2.